and welcome. I'm Beatrice Levinson, naturopath. Today I'm going to talk to you about adrenal and chronic fatigue. What are your adrenals? The adrenals are two little glands that are sitting on top of the kidneys, like you're seeing on the pictures of this podcast. So they have many functions. It's a part of the endocrinal gland system. And like everything as far as the endocrinal system, they are linked to each other. So the adrenal glands have interaction with the thyroid, with ovaries or testicles, with the pancreas, with the entire endocrinal system. So what are their functions? Their main function is to help us handle stress and secrete different hormones that are helping us to handle the stress that comes at us. So they're called the fight or flight mechanism. So if there is a danger that comes behind me, like a tiger, I need to act, and very quickly. And the body puts together a whole immediate system so I can either flight and save my life or fight. The problem with our modern society is that we have constant stress that comes from our boss, that comes from being in traffic, that comes from EMF, electromagnetic fields. It comes from family stress, financial stress, etc. So our little adrenal glands, which are really two little things on top of the kidneys, but with big importance, big function, are asked way too much on a daily basis. And we don't have enough rest time, we don't have enough downtime, we don't have enough time without any noise, no kids running around, no tasks to do. So when we are under stressful situation, the adrenals are going to secrete hormones. They secrete cortisol, they secrete adrenaline, noradrenaline, they also secrete DHEA. All that is normal. They also secrete hormones that are regulating blood pressure. ACTH, aldosterone are all the hormones that the adrenals are able to secrete. They also control body fluid. That's why they have an importance on the blood pressure. But they also help us to taper inflammation. If there is an inflammatory process somewhere in the body, the adrenals will secrete cortisol, which is our natural anti-inflammatory. They help us to respond to immune stress. So if there is a bug, a virus, the flu, or bacteria that is coming up, the adrenals are going to help us handle all of that. Conventionally, the adrenal fatigue that I'm talking about is not even recognized. It's not even in the era of recognition from conventional medicine. There is only two diseases that are accepted, we'll say, from conventional medicine, which is Addison's disease, when the adrenals are completely failing, and Cushing's syndrome disease, when the adrenals are really in hyper function. But in between those two extremes, which do happen, we have all the rest of the population, meaning you and me, because of the lifestyle we are in today. 100 years ago, when people were peasants, or even more than that, 200 years ago, of course they did have stress, but it was a different nature of stress. They didn't have cell phone, they didn't have TV, they didn't have emails and text that comes to you all day long. They didn't have a boss to report to, maybe they did, and they also had the contact with nature. They had more downtime, they had more resting time that we don't have nowadays. So when you have adrenal fatigue, it usually goes with kidney fatigue. In Chinese medicine, kidney adrenal function is the same thing. Basically, kidneys, which also deal with detoxification, and kidney deal also with the balance between the fluids in the body. So the kidney and the adrenals are dealing with an enormous amount of work on a daily basis in our modern society. So when you have adrenal / kidney dysfunction, you're going to have digestion function, you're going to have allergies, you're going to have chronic fatigue, you may have hypothyroidism, you may have a weak immune system, diabetes, degenerative disease, etc., etc., etc. I always tell my female patient that if they want to have a peaceful menopause, they should really take care of their adrenals. So there's a lot of symptoms that go with adrenal fatigue. It can be being cold, it can be gaining weight in the middle, between the breast and the hips, basically. That kind of weight for women is related to adrenal dysfunction. There's fatigue, of course, there's insomnia. It can be night sweats, and it can be also the lack of perspiration. When people can't perspire, despite how hot it is, it's a lack of mineral, or it's an imbalance between the minerals. And behind that, there is often an adrenal problem. So we can test our adrenal. There is a test that you could do at home simply with a pressure cuff. You buy a pressure cuff and you take your blood pressure lying down, and then you sit up and you take your blood pressure sitting up immediately. And if the blood pressure drops more than 10 points from when you were lying down, you're systolic, then it's considered like an adrenal fatigue. It's called a Ragland's test. That's easy to do, and I used to do that in my practice in Monterey. Now I don't do that as much because I'm practicing mostly remotely. There's things that are going to affect your adrenals, such as caffeine. Caffeine boosts the adrenals, sugar, tobacco. Everything that is exciting to the nervous system basically is going to give a jolt to the adrenals. But then the problem is that after the jolt, they just crash, they go down. So it's not a good idea to stimulate them that way. And there is also a test that is a saliva test that I recommend very, very often. And the saliva test consists of taking saliva sample from the morning to the evening, sometimes at night. So you take the first sample when you wake up fasting, then you take another sample at noon, afternoon, and then evening. And sometimes we add another test during the night to see how your cortisol is being secreted. Normal secretion of our cortisol is that it's high in the morning and then it goes down as the day moves along. But quite often we see abnormal results where people have what we call a reverse cortisol. They're exhausted in the morning and they have a second wind at night. So around 10 p.m. or 8 p.m. or whatever, they feel better. And that's where they do a lot of things and they stay up late, which is really a bad idea for your adrenals. That's a test that I like to run because it gives me a lot of information on the level of fatigue that people are, and also it helps me to judge better what recommendation to give them as far as nutrition, but also as far as supplements. So the way, once you have your adrenal tested, then what do you do to restore them? The first and very thing is to rest. There's some cases where I tell people that they should ideally be on a desert island. No kids, no husband, no work, no noise, no nothing. Just take a book or maybe some music that you like and just stay there for 6 months to a year. So of course this is not possible. But what is possible is to organize during your routine, your days and your weeks, some moments to do nothing. I used to call it my do nothing moment, which is usually for me on a Sunday, where I would sit on the terrace and just watch the bird and the animals and play with my dog. and not even read, not even do anything, because I'm always reading something and that's a stimulant and that's not necessarily resting. So resting is number one. Sleeping, which is resting, of course, is number two, and you don't want to neglect your sleep. You want to have time for that. That's necessary for your well-being. And ideally, you need to go to bed around 10 o'clock and maybe read a little bit and then fall asleep. Even if you're not used to that, you need to train yourself to do that more and more and go to bed at a reasonable time. Sleeping 6 hours or 8 hours, doesn't matter how much you need, from 10 p.m., for example, to 6 a.m., that's 8 hours, that's very good, is very different than sleeping from midnight to 8, because there is a natural rhythm in the body, and that's what we test when we test the saliva, the cortisol rhythm. And the adrenals' natural rhythm is to recuperate more during these hours between 10 and midnight. So I encourage you to go to bed sooner than later. We can use supplements, certainly, and I use Adrenal Complex, which I choose depending on the test result. But one ingredient that I use quite often is called phosphatidylserine. Phosphatidylserine is a regulator of the cortisol rhythm. So either your cortisol is high or it's low or it's not secreted at the right moment, it doesn't matter. This phosphatidylserine will help no matter what to regulate your cortisol. As far as other supplements, we have herbs that are very useful, like licorice, but licorice could increase blood pressure, so that's something to be careful with. There is some deglycerized licorice which can be used, so there is not the activating part of the blood pressure. We use certainly B6 and B12, all the B vitamins, the vitamin C as well is very, very important, but most important is rest, sleep, and diet. And your adrenals need a lot of fat in order to recuperate. They're fat junkie. So that's your coconut oil, that's your butter or your ghee, that's the duck fat and the goose fat and all the pork fat if you can get it organic. All the fats are good. Avocado, coconut, all of that is good source for your adrenals. And then let's see what else. Salt protocol. I have people with such adrenal fatigue that they would benefit to dilute an eighth of a teaspoon, a quarter of a teaspoon, or even a half a teaspoon with water, salt and water. So you want to take whole salt, like Celtic sea salt, Himalayan salt, salt that has not been denatured, and you dilute that with your water and drink that in the morning. This is a trick that I got from a book called Adrenal Fatigue, the 21st Century Syndrome, something like that, by Dr. Brown. And this is very useful to get your cortisol going in the morning in a natural way. It's so much better than a shot of espresso or caffeine, because it's not going to jolt your adrenals, it's just going to feed them deeply. And then, of course, like with everything else in functional medicine, you need to work on all other areas and aspects, and that's your gut, with the gut flora, and that's thyroid, and that's the other hormones, and your liver and gallbladder function, and mental, because some people don't have excessive stress in their life, but they create stress for themselves. They put pressure on themselves. And that's a whole mental, psychological work that I think is absolutely necessary to do if you do have adrenal fatigue. And let's face it, I think most of us in this century, we do have adrenal fatigue. One last thing, your adrenals need minerals. So I'm a big fan of quinine. Quinine is seawater. It's a French product. The seawater is harvested in a very specific area where the plankton in the sea is very, very abundant, and it gives a quality to the water that the minerals are equal or like the minerals in the body. So it contains sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium, boron, and zinc and copper, etc. in the proper ratio. So I'm a big fan of Quinton. You can find that online. It's quite expensive, but I totally think it's worth it. And if you come to France, you can find it at a cheaper rate. And then for minerals, you need sea salt, you need Quinton, and you also need to add juicing. If you do fresh vegetable juices and a little bit of fruit juices, you're going to increase your mineral content, so you're going to nourish your adrenals. How do you know that your adrenals are getting better? You can do your blood pressure test, and you can also certainly redo your saliva test, which is not a very expensive test. I use Diagnostics, and it's $140 to test your adrenals. It's a very good quality test. So that's a summary of your adrenals. There's much more to tell, of course, but that is going to come in teaching that I'm going to start soon. So keep us posted. Please make your comments, ask your questions, and stay tuned. I'll talk to you next week. Bye.